Good afternoon and welcome to the week. This is Chewing It Over, and I first want to point out the damn lies in the corner. It says Mondays and Fridays. It is untrue, fake news, likely to be Mondays and Thursdays now. So I just keep forgetting to change it. So sorry about that. And as I said on Friday with Tom Jacobs, which was a cracking episode, by the way, it was great. I said, why Fridays not Thursdays? Mondays and Fridays makes more sense than Mondays and Thursdays. It is purely because every now and again, I think I might go and the sun's shining, might go out and play in my camper van with my kids and stuff. Is that so much to ask? Is that okay? Is that all right with you? Please send your complaints to info@physio-matters.com and also any feedback, of course. We'd love to hear from you. It'd be quite funny, actually, if you did say, no, you're not allowed to go on holiday, Jack. That'd be quite a fun intervention from you. I'm going to hide this frame because it's lies in a second. But on Friday, we had Tom Jacobs on talking about youth ACL injuries. Fascinating topic, in which he's going to unpack with his colleagues at Therapy Live. And so I was super hyped. Brilliant guest, brilliant topic. And then I checked the diary today. Now, fortunately, we're talking about something really interesting. The launch of Physio TV, which is really cool, that him and his team have been working on and I've been involved in more recently and got a bit of an insight into what's coming down the pipe with that, which is cool. So we're going to chat to Jim, but sorry for the anticlimax, especially after last week's show. So yeah, try and keep the energy high, guys, and apologies in advance for this guy.
It's so offensive. Am I that much of a downgrade? I'm that much of a downgrade from Tom. To be fair, I'm a downgrade from Tom Jacobs, but
you know that you are. But the subject matter isn't. It's more that he was such a brilliant topic and person, and he's novel as well because he's not been on the show before. So a lot of people really reacted really positively to him. And your old hat, mate. And you're not talking about rheumatology, so everyone's just like, what the hell's he even doing on the show?
Well, maybe that'll make a nice change, though. So that'll be better.
Yeah, maybe. Well, we'll see. We'll soon see, won't we? They'll tell us. Then you know what the audience are like. They'll soon tell us if they're like, "Oh, well, you two talking about anyway." So what I want to do first is, in case people haven't seen this, I'm just going to play one of the little trailers because thing from the 24-hour podcast jobber. So. Fun.
Yeah, very good.
Fun, isn't it, that? Yeah. Right, Jim, what is it? Why did you do away with Physio Matters podcast? And what's the plan?
Okay, so where would you like me to start? Let's start with what is it? So it all links together, those three questions, I suppose. But what is it is us moving to more of a visual medium. So hence the TV portion. But also a little bit of shorter content as well. So a lot of the feedback we were getting from the podcast was, we love the podcast, but can you do bite-sized content? And that fits with the world of today. Over the last few years, less people are commuting, and there's less that dead space time where we used to be able to fill people's hour-long commutes with a long-form podcast. And people want a bit more bite-sized. So we've coupled that with what we used to do, but also we're going to try and go and see interesting people, interesting places, really try to shine a light on best practice, which I think it's not that we got away from it, but certainly with trying to make every show clinical on the Physio Matters podcast, we definitely were moving into getting towards quite niche clinical topics, I think, and that lent itself to the long form. And I think I felt, and then bullied you into it, that it was time for a little bit of a change. We had the 100th podcast, which is why it's now. We felt like that was a good number to finish on. What have we done? Over 3.5 million downloads, something like that.
Yeah.
And we were starting towards the end of last year, started to have conversations about, could we go back to some of our old guests? Could we cover some topics again, see what's changed? And I just started to think, before we run out of ideas and before someone says one of our shows has dipped in quality, let's pivot and change and do something new. And I think now's the time for it. Now's the time.
No, that's a good point. Well, we certainly don't want shows to dip in quality, do we? Like this one is doing with you. But I mean, two things that I'm concerned about that I think obviously you've heard my concerns and have mitigated them. So I just want to bring this public. One is, are we just racing to the bottom of the brainstem? Are we succumbing to chasing bite-sized when the reason we went long form is because these things were complicated. These things need more detailed understanding. And the other one probably associated to that is, are we just spoon feeding? Why have Physio Matters suddenly started pandering? We moved the audience, we made a persuasive case, and then we unpack things in long form for good reason. Why is now the time for us to succumb?
Well, I don't feel like we're succumbing. I feel like we are reacting to the feedback of the content we've previously created. I think if people want long form, there's 100 main episodes and however many bonus ones you can go back to and listen to. But also, I think, without giving too much away about the first episode that we have recorded and is currently being edited, I think what people will see is we're certainly not scratching the surface of anything, and we're certainly not succumbing to any gimmicks. I don't think. Maybe we'll be proven wrong by the feedback, but looking at what we've created in this first episode, I think it's very much in keeping with more of a documentary style of recording. So less of a pure one-on-one interview style, more of a let's go and really see what we can find out on location, and try to, like I said, shine a light on these things, which I don't think we would have been able to do in an audio medium. So I think what we're able to do with video is very different to what we're able to do with audio. Right. And I think that's going to be, and I think people will, therapists and other healthcare people will find it very different. I don't think there's anything else out there at the moment that's doing this. Again, happy to be proven wrong, but I think we will be fairly unique.
So we're not going to succumb, because that is that you succumb to sort of clickbait as well. I can see this now as well, that you guys have been thinking about what topics and themes need to be interrogated beyond one person or a couple of people being interviewed. I think that's the thing that most persuaded me, is that you were saying that, no, it's not that we're going to go superficial. We're going to go deeper. That's interesting. And that then the modernizing of the platform of which we produced that, because to me it was like deeper meant a deeper interview, more difficult questions, longer form, 24-hour podcast became our norm. Whereas the documentary format, I can see, having shot the first one with you a couple of weeks ago, I can see what you were meaning, and I think that's really good. And I can see there's a few people on the chat excited about that. Please, if you're watching live, let us know what subject matter deserves a deep dive. Like, what, we've obviously got some ideas, but is it, what themes and trends warrant getting stuck into that and going and shooting some interviews with people, but also then investigating, say, styles of practice, software, visiting places that are doing things differently. Like, what topics and themes do you think would you want to be, not just under us pointing our cameras at? Because I think that's really interesting. I'd love to hear from you on what your thoughts are there. Ultimately, you need that message to reach people, and if people are not engaging with longer sessions, then you need to adapt. That's a good question, Jim. Is part of the reaction because were we decreasing our reach? Like, is there evidence that people were sort of unfollowing, unsubscribing, that sort of thing, or was it that we plateaued or whatever? Like, what's Anna? Because Anna's making a great point there. Did the data suggest that we were sort of losing traction?
So interestingly, if you superficially look at if we released a podcast yesterday, normally would be Sundays we release a podcast, then if you just look at that numbers, then we're actually doing less listens over the first week. But what you actually notice, or what we've noticed, is when you interrogate the data, is our total number of listens are the same. It's just that people are a few months behind. So we're still doing 35, 40, 45,000 listens in a month. They're just not of the newest episode, and we're getting
People
our
are
back
looking
catalogue
back onto the catalogue, right? But
well,
and also
people are
we've
looking
got all
back
the
on the
30.
catalogue, but they're also not keeping up. So I think what it's showing is people are. So let's say you are one from last month. It might get, I don't know, let's use some numbers, 7,000 or 8,000 listens in the first 2 weeks, and it used to would have got 15, 20, whereas now that it's coming up to the 15, 20, but in 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
Gotcha.
So if people are just lagging behind. Now, how much of that is there is a plethora of podcasts you can, listen to, hundreds of bloody things. I've got one, you've got this, we've got our own big, between our team, we've got about 6. There's podcasts all over the place. And how much of it is that people aren't listening to podcasts as much as they were? And I think it's probably a combination.
Yeah. And the Physio Matters audience is also often members of ours now, of course, following the therapy work that then they are studying those presentations, panel discussions, that sort of thing, which are more visual and more accessible now on their phones and stuff. So I think that that made a point. I kind of get it, and my concerns were alleviated by these answers, so it was pleased forward to the public. Luke Todd said, going all in on TikTok. There's going to be some. We're going to do some shorts, though, aren't we? YouTube shorts. Mm-hmm. That sort of portrait orientation, which might find its way onto TikTok, but certainly Instagram Reels, that sort of stuff. I know because they had us shoot some, which was funny. There's a guy here called Matthew Scarsbrook who says he's excited to see the final result. I think he might be involved in some of this. Matt is the producer and director of Physio Matters TV, and he's doing a phenomenal work. Really specialising on the medium. He reminds me a bit of a young Jack March when he got into podcasting, right?
Don't tell him that. He'll get offended because he'll think in a few years' time he'll start getting abuse.
I'd probably say that he reminds me a bit of you and Rob Tyre back in the early days. Do you remember, like, you were both, like, Rob with regards to, like, how might we construct how could we do semi-structured interviews that really then get into the literature, but also the application of practice. And then you started to then think, right, what is it about the podcasting medium as a form, what is it about making sure we get the best out of audio? How do we what's the format in that regard, like technically, and getting better and moving us over when we moved over to different providers and stuff. So that's kind of what it reminds me of. He's kind of really nerding out on the details, which is really cool. And so as what happened with Physio Matters podcast, then I can only see this having the similar sorts of success. Rob's answered my question as to what he'd like to see, and he's answered it lengthily. Let's read this. Following patient journeys from start to finish, could be post-op protocols, ACLs, total knees, or sciatica, frozen shoulder, understanding what clinicians do, certain types of treatment and rehab, useful learning point for many, what we got here, many therapists and clinicians. Right, thanks, Rob. That's good. That's a nice idea, actually. So you could imagine that, let's take frozen shoulder. So in a Physio Matters TV style then, Jim, spell out some options as to how we might approach a topic like that.
So I think we would combine speaking to various different people. So we would speak to a patient or patients about their experience of frozen shoulder and the journey of the frozen shoulder. I think we would talk to probably someone in primary care, a first contact physio or a GP or a SEM doc, someone like that, about initially picking up that type of presentation. What would be the initial management, initial advice, moving on to a rehab specialist, and then finishing with someone probably in orthopedics around when and if we do intervention. I've probably missed out radiology as well. I don't want to. There's been a bit of poking around frozen imaging shoulders of the recent history, but that would be really good. What are the pros and cons of imaging a shoulder, and should we image every stiff shoulder, for example? So that would be how the kind of journey would go. So you would build this picture, keep the patient experience and what's happening to them, but also then, as Rob's perfectly spelled out, what are the options at each stage? What if it doesn't work? Where do you go? Build that kind of picture the idea is to build that over somewhere between 20 to 30 minutes, period of time with nice, pretty visuals. That's the idea.
As a documentary. Now, there's lots of that's a really good example. That well done on the fly, Jim, because it gave me
Thanks.
time to then think of a few things myself. So you think about what the controversies are in that pathway, right? Detection is one, and the to image or not to image, routine MRs for stiff shoulders and stuff. Routine X-rays for stiff shoulders. That is something that we would therefore be able to get the opposing views on that, and what justifies it and what doesn't, because the latest is that orthopods are digging their heels in part because they get the sample selection that they see. They've been mortified at a lack of X-ray. Yes, but that's the sample bias. What about in random primary care? We now have data to suggest that would be belt and braces. Then you kind of go down, and because Rob's rightly said start to finish, you then end up thinking about interventional means, right? Timeliness of injectables, what does a hydrodistension dilatation, call it what you will, do or don't do, when might that be appropriate? Then you've got other more surgical interventions and imaging that you would get on site, and you would then be able to grill them in locations that can give detail, and we can get visuals that would support that audio and solve that, look at not necessarily solving that problem in it, but where are we up to in each of those things, and what does that mean for the patients and the therapists that need to serve them? Like, how can we learn, but also then be able to use that and leverage that as a demonstration of this is where we're up to, this is contemporary? Because I think that's one of the things that kind of got me concerned. Historically, we've always been able to look back and throw to the catalogue, right, of podcasts. But fundamentally, as is the nature of the fast-moving clinical landscape, it's going to have changed and tweaked and adapted and stuff. And so it just feels like our ability to sort of say, this is where we're up to now. Here are some of the open question marks. This is what we're feeling fairly confident on. But this is how it affects patients, and it affects the therapist trying to help them. And so any number of those sorts of clinical topics, all the ideas I've had is like, what integrated technologies are coming through that are not gimmicky and are going to be, but how do we mitigate that risk of gimmick, of risk of sort of narrowing or zooming too close to something again? But how do we make sure we're also not nihilistic? Like, what is their place? Now, you think about who would invite us to interrogate that. That is exciting, because it means that you've got companies that aren't going to say they've got skeletons in all the closets, right? They're going to invite us in if they are credible, and we're going to be able to be thorough and understand it better. So that's one of the things that I'm particularly interested in. Joe says, I'd like to see people working in a range of environments in more unusual careers that they've curated themselves. That's an interesting one. I'm pretty sure there's something on the list on that with regards to direct functional rehab and getting on site and on location with people. So yeah, that's brilliant, Joe. I don't know if she knew that and she's teed it up, which is quite funny if she has. But if she hasn't, then Joe,
I read that like working in the desert or like under the sea or something in those environments.
Yeah, under the sea. Yeah, physios on oil rigs, and it's just like 20 minutes of us trying to get there or something. Right, okay, that'd be cool. I mean, it'd be fun. Rob Bevan's also complimenting your synopsis. Exactly what I was thinking about, but far better worded. Cheers, Rob, and cheers, Jim. Yeah, it was good. And I don't know when this was. Scars were laughing at me with it, but
I think on your point that you just mentioned about people inviting us in and people, if people did have concerns around, let's use selling out. So let's say we were going to see a tech company or anything like that. I think the first episode will mitigate that. It's not with a tech company, but it could have succumbed to some of that process, and I don't think it has. And I think people will be very interested in the first one. I think it's going to be really good, and a really good scene setter for what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where we need to try and look at, right, are we explaining this project well? Are people being able to see it? And then I think the first episode will answer most of those questions, but then 2 or 3 in, they'll start to realize what it's scope. And we need to as well recognize that this is a really, it's an innovation akin to Physio Matters podcast, and that took a bit of time for people to realise what that is. It's not as if all the pennies dropped straight away with people. They realise that, right, this is the pursuit of truth that we're going for, and this is the angle of which we're going to try to understand things better. Interrogative interviews with the best and brightest, long form, lightly edited. These are, it's going to take a few people to realise, but then also we then really do want to hear from you for suggestions as to what to go for, because it's going to, it's an intensive process, and one that therefore we want to make sure we highlight the best topics that you're most hungry for, the things that you feel too many questions are left, too many things we're not quite sure about, too many controversies that are otherwise not poked at appropriately thoroughly. And so we really are keen to hear from you. Luke's made a suggestion here. What does good care look like for different problems? Taking out the fluff, avoiding over complexity. Will probably need to be a series to fit all that in, and will be a great learning resource. I think is that part of the plan as well, Jim, is that there are different sort of different styles of different lengths, but then also then almost like playlists to that theme, like condition, that would be more conditions, more technologies, more, short top tips, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So if think about, I don't know how many people will be familiar with different types of YouTube channels, but the idea is we're going to try and, as you just mentioned, is very labor intensive for us to make the documentary we made the other week. So there was 3 of us on location. We filmed all day, and we're aiming to use under 30 minutes of content for that. Whereas before, with a lightly edited audio content, we would record for 90 minutes, aiming to get 75 minutes of content. We recorded for, we started around 7 a.m. and finished around 6 p.m., didn't we, to get 30 minutes worth? And poor Matt is beavering away editing that down. So there's going to be, within that, we will be able to create smaller chunks of things, which we might put to 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds even, that we might put out on TikTok or wherever, the tiki-toki as some people call it. We might do that. But also we want to create, in the meantime, we'll create other bits of content as well to keep clinical matters up as well. And we're still going to have, obviously, Chewing It Over will go out on the audio podcast, and we've got, as Joe Turner's podcast is still around, and various other bits of, so it won't be disappearing completely, but I'm hoping people will be a little bit patient with us as we create these first lot of bigger projects, because they are very time consuming. So I think people will notice a slight change of pace from us as well.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that everyone seems to be being pretty patient. I don't know if I'm going to be patient. I'm too excited. You've shown me too much. You and Matt have given me glimpses into what could be. So I just want it like yesterday. But no, it's super exciting, and doing it well and getting that quality right is obviously super important. And I think it's also important I think there's some real, like the questions we started with, that's legitimate. People need to understand that this isn't a compromise. This isn't this is a step change that doesn't necessarily mean that we then completely sell out and corrupt the model and the brand, etc. If anything, it's a way of us going deeper, going harder. I'm interested in, because when you think about how we can incentivize people to put themselves forward, to be brave, to suggest and invite us in, one of the things that we'll be able to do is, obviously, we've got a day's worth of shooting. We will have plenty of things that are going to be useful for that organisation that we don't end up using in the documentary and stuff. And so whilst we're not going to suddenly be like sycophantic and be creating a documentary that's one big advert for something, although it might end up being if it stands up to scrutiny, we will have lots of things that then would be useful that we can then share with those people that invite us. So if you're kind enough to bring us in, you can also then hope that the edits of the documentary are going to show things favourably, which I sort of see why they wouldn't be if you're doing things well and you know that we're fair. But then also what got shot that didn't get used is also then available. And so we are really keen to hear from you if you feel like you want to, if you feel you've got a project or you're associated to a project that you are either very proud of, very interested in, sort of any intrigue, and we might not have seen it, then let us know. Obviously, let us know on social media or email us info@physio-matters.com, and we are just super keen to know how best to really get stuck into the topics that you want us to, right? What is this for if it's not for raising standards in practice via the therapists? And we know that you guys put your patients first. And so that's one of the things that's most exciting. Anything else to add then, Jim, before we wrap?
I'm hoping like NASA are listening or something. I'd quite like to go see some NASA physios. That'd be cool, wouldn't it?
But that's you just no, Jim. Right. So Joe said this like 10 minutes ago, and you've thought about nothing else other than like physios
so
on the
NASA
moon.
And then physios in Bali. They're the two.
What did you say? Well, you said underwater, didn't you?
Underwater.
So,
well, maybe they do underwater in Bali.
That's how carried. Just to give you all an example of just how carried away we're all getting. So yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in today. Please do share this. Get chatting. Be asking your colleagues, your friends, your followers. What would they like to see? Help to set the scene, right? We are nothing without the feedback loop that surrounds us. The community of practice that surrounds Physio Matters and Therapy Live is enormous, and it's super important that then is channeled into this new project. It's something that needn't be sat distinct. It should complement all of our other work, and so please do let us know what you guys think and what you guys found. Ollie Colburn's giving you a bit of insight here, mate. Look. Athletic trainers working at NASA, right? Well, Ollie's are in then, so that's what the Physio Matters TV is going into Galactic very soon. All right, I'm going to play the little trailer once more because it's cool as a teaser, and then we're gonna wrap up there. All right, thanks, Jim. Thanks for coming on, mate.
Speak soon.
Cheers. See you later, everyone. Bye.